Merry Christmas as well. It's time. Technically, I looked it up. Advent season in the church starts next Sunday, December 2nd. But retail season's already kicked off. So we're in the Christmas season, and we are going to begin a Christmas series today. It's going to carry us to the end of the year. The music and the mistletoe. We're going to be looking at some of the stories and the theology behind some of our favorite Christmas songs, Christmas carols. And this morning we're kicking it off with I'll Be Home for Christmas. This may be one of the simplest Christmas songs ever written. It's got an introduction, a single verse, and a chorus. That's it. Just 12 lines. Don't even mention Jesus. And yet, these dozen lines became a prayer for a nation at war. It became a prayer for a bunch of young men on both sides of the theater of war during World War II. The song was written in 1942, right in the heart of the war. On October 4th, 1943, Bing Crosby, we just heard him, recorded I'll Be Home for Christmas as a follow-up to his unparalleled hit from the year before. In 1942, he had released White Christmas. And White Christmas stayed on the charts as a bestseller for 17 weeks, which means people were still buying the White Christmas record at Easter. So White Christmas was huge, and yet in the midst of a war, I'll Be Home for Christmas generated more airplay, sold more record sales than did Crosby's hit of the previous year. It quickly became the most requested show at Christmas OSU shows, both in Europe and the Pacific. Some historians have said that for service personnel and their families, the only inspirational song that was its equal was God Bless America. It's been a staple in the military through World War II, through Korea, through Vietnam, through Iraq and Afghanistan, and all over the world, capturing the emotions of both those on the battlefront and those back home praying for their safe return. It's been recorded countless times by so many different artists. It's sold millions of records. And simple or not, this simple song has been embraced by every facet of society. It may not be a spiritual song, all right, but I hope to show you by the time we're done this morning that at its heart lies perhaps the most spiritual theme of all of them. Let me introduce it this way. The late George Carlin, the comedian, had a routine he used to do about the differences between football and baseball. Now, I know this morning, I don't know if we have any A&M football fans. They're probably all still asleep after last night. Used to, yeah. Thing went 7 overtimes in the highest scoring game in history. Crazy. But anyway, football versus baseball. Different sports. Football tends to be more intense. Baseball more laid back. But in their differences, we find a glimpse of the theme for this morning. So the difference between football and baseball. Baseball, Carlin says, is played on a diamond in a park. Football is played on a gridiron in a stadium, like Soldier Field, War Memorial Stadium. Baseball starts in the spring, the season of new life. Football starts in the fall, when everything begins to die. In football, you wear a helmet. In baseball, you wear a cap. In football, there's a specialist who comes in to kick something. In baseball, a specialist comes in to relieve someone. Baseball has the 7th inning stretch. Football has the 2-minute warning. Baseball gets extra innings. Ooh, you like your innings? Here, have some extra. Football has sudden death. In football, the runner will give you the stiff arm. In baseball, the runner gets to slide. Whee! But the biggest difference is that the objectives of the two games are totally different. In football, the battle is fought in the trenches. The object is for the quarterback, also known as the field general, to be on target with an aerial assault, riddling the defense by hitting his receivers with deadly accuracy while evading the blitz, even if he has to use the shotgun. With short bullet passes and long bombs, he marches his troops into enemy territory, balancing his aerial assault with a sustained ground attack which punches holes in the forward of the wall's enemy's defensive line. In baseball, the object is to go home and be safe. Football, be safe at home, right? It's the difference between baseball and football. Well, safe at home. That's the theme of this song, and it's really a beautiful theme. Because is there any other word in the English language that has the equivalent power of that one little word, home? See, it can fill your heart. It can make you smile. It can make you cry. I don't care how old you are. I don't care what you have accomplished in life, how independent you may be. That little word touches the deepest depths of the human heart. Home. And when we think about home, we think about it a lot this time of year. So many songs that we sing, not only our carol for today, but there's no place like home for the holidays, right? Or baby, please come home. Baby, please come home for Christmas. And I know with this many people gathered together, certainly there are a lot of different emotions about home that are here. Some of you can't wait to go home. Some of you just came through Thanksgiving and didn't get to go home, but you've got your eye on Christmas. You've got some tickets booked. Some of you, when you go home to be with your extended families over the holidays, you can't wait for that because, just every single person around that table is the picture of emotional health and spiritual maturity, and you just can't wait to be with them. It's true for some. Some not so much. I heard about a guy last week that came back from Thanksgiving, and the first thing he did was sit down and schedule a 2-hour therapy session, right? Because there's the home that we long for, but then there's the home that we have. And sometimes those two things don't measure up. There's kind of a gap. And sometimes that gap can be big and painful. A lot of interesting terminology we use around the word home. We talk about dysfunctional homes. We talk about, broken homes, homes that are so broken because there's a longing inside of us for a home that really no home in this world can fully fulfill. The Bible actually has a lot to say about home and why we long for it. And so today we're going to talk about this. Why do we long for home so much? What is it about the word that touches us so deeply? We're going to talk about why we're actually not at home, why we're all homesick. We all have this existential ache at some level. And then we're going to talk about what does it mean to be home with God. And then I'm going to close today by giving you an opportunity to be at home with God if you've never done that before. So first the thing is why we long for home. I saw a little sign the other day, a little knick-knack stories. Home is where your story begins. And I like that because home is really where we get shaped, for better, for worse. We get molded there. We learn how to live there. We get our name from our home. We get our identity, right? When you ask people, one of the icebreaker questions, right? Well, where are you from? Where do you call home? And the Bible says that parents, we're to be very intentional, very careful to make sure home is a place where children come to know God and come to love God. There's a verse I often read when we have a baby dedication up here during the services, and it's the great commandment that Moses gave the people of Israel. It's called the Shema Yisrael, Deuteronomy 6:5. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. And then he says this, he says, these commands that I have given you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home. And when you walk along the road, and when you lie down, and when you get up, write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. He says, it's not just for temple. Not just for synagogue, not just for church. It's to be at your home. Make your home a God-soaked, God-saturated, God-loving, God-reflecting place. We long for home because it's supposed to be a place that's safe. Home is a place that you can rest, and there's many reflections of this in the Scriptures. This is from Psalm 84:3. It says, even the sparrow has found a home. Even the sparrow. The sparrow is considered the least significant animal in the kingdom. Even the sparrow and the swallow a nest for herself where she may have her young. That requires safety, right? And then this beautiful thought that we'll come back to. A place where? Near your altar, O Lord Almighty, my King and my God. Home is a safe place. You might remember the story back in Genesis, in the Noah story. There came a time after the flooding when they decided, is it safe to come out yet? And so they released a dove out to see if it could find some land, but the dove came back. And it says this, Genesis 8:9, but the dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot. That's a Hebrew idiom for home, a place to rest the sole of your foot, a place to rest. That's what home is. Now, my wife says this is probably written by a man, right? Because only a man would think home is a place for rest, right? Not making this up. There's actually a survey when they ask different people and families, what is your favorite place in the home? What's your favorite room in the home? And everybody said the kitchen. Kids said the kitchen. Husband said the kitchen, except wives. Wives didn't say the kitchen. Anybody want to guess the number one answer that wives gave for their favorite room in the home? The bathroom. That's right. Because they could go in and lock the door and you get some peace and quiet and they can't get to you, right? Especially young moms. They can rest there, see. So it's a place for rest. It's a place for safety. Back to our baseball analogy for a minute. When you're running the bases, you're always vulnerable. Our son Ari plays baseball and he loves to steal bases. He's always, running. So when he gets on base, we all get a little nervous because it's like, oh, he's gonna, don't get caught, don't get picked off. So you're vulnerable running from first to second. And then you're vulnerable running from second to third. But then when you come from third, there's no fourth base, is there? No, we call it, right, home. Because when you're home, you're safe. That's the goal, is to be safe at home. And that's why when home is not a safe place, it's really devastating. It's extremely devastating. By the way, just a pastoral word. It is not okay to God when the home is not a safe place, when a home becomes violent. And if that's the condition that you're in, you just need to hear this, but talk to, a Connect group leader, talk to me, talk to a trusted, good Christian counselor. Or if you got to get out to get safe, get out to get safe. God is not okay with a home being a place of violence. It just violates something near and dear to his very nature. So we long for home because home is a place to be safe, a place to be rested. We also long for home because home is a place where you're supposed to belong, right? Beautiful thing about home is they've kind of got to take you in. It's a place where you're welcomed, you're accepted, you're loved, you're honored, you belong just because of who you are, right? We've got all kinds of language around this, right? He's the hometown boy or the hometown girl. We talk about having a home field advantage. And what does it mean when you say to somebody, I just really feel at home here? Think about the way we use those words. Home is what you don't have to deserve. You belong there. Listen, you ever been at a job and they say, we're like family here? Okay, yeah, but you can fire me. Home is where you can't get fired. You get what you don't deserve. You belong there not because of any obligation. And that's grace. See, that's a little picture of grace. It's a little sanctuary of grace in our world. The first verses in the Bible in the Old Testament are about God creating a home, right? The Garden of Eden. We still name towns Eden. Anybody ever been to Eden, Texas? We could get in the car now and be there in 2.5 hours. It's on the way out to San Angelo. Why do we do that? Because of our longing for home, see? And Eden was the first home, but it wasn't just because it was beautiful. It wasn't just because there was an abundance there. What made it home was that God was there. And Adam and Eve could walk with him in the cool of the evening. They could talk with him. They were home, see? And then all of the Old Testament is the story of our loss of home. When people left the garden after the fall, we're leaving home. And the truth is, we're not home yet. The last words of the Old Testament, the prophet Malachi, is God's promise to fix the home. I think this is so cool. It's this prophecy about a man who's going to come and change everything. Very last words of the Old Testament. In fact, let's read this out loud together. Stick this up here. It says what? He will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers. I don't think that's a coincidence that those are the last words you read in the Old Testament before you get to the story of Jesus. See, if you think about what this would mean in our world, in our country, in our city, it'll make your heart ache. To have hearts of the fathers turn towards the children, the hearts of the children turn toward their father, towards their parents, because we're not at home. It's a very poignant line in Psalm 90 about the home. Psalm 90 is the only psalm in the Bible attributed to Moses. And I was thinking about this week about how much Moses must have thought about home, because the reality was he didn't really have one. If you know the Moses story, he was born into a time when his nation, Israel, they were in slavery. They were kind of in exile in Egypt. Not only that, there was a genocide going on around when he was born, and they were killing kids. And so his parents hid him, right, in a little basket down the river. You heard this story? He floats over, and so he kind of leaves his birth home and gets picked up by members of Pharaoh's family, and so he's raised kind of this orphan in the king's palace. But at one point when he's a youth, a young man, he sees an Egyptian soldier beating one of his fellow Hebrews, and he rises up in anger and kills the Egyptian. And somebody sees him, so he has to take off. So he even loses that home. He goes off into exile, goes back to the backside of the desert, and he's a shepherd out there, and he meets a woman and marries her and gets in with her family. And now he's got this, finally kind of got this home thing. And then one day he's out and he sees this talking bush. Right? And God speaks to him through the burning bush and says, Moses, leave this home now. Go back to Egypt, and I want you to lead your people into freedom. So he goes back home, and first thing he does is, all right, guys, let's go. And then they all leave their home. Homes they've been in for hundreds of years, and leads them out into the wilderness. And for the next 40 years, they live out of tents, and they're wandering from this place to that place. And finally, they get up just to the edge of the promised land, right across the river. And God has Moses go up on this mountain right at the borders, Mount Pisgah. And he looks over it, and God shows it to him. And yet, Moses never gets to go there. He never gets to enter it. His life ended up on that mountain in Pisgah. So close to home, but he just never felt it. And so this is what Moses learns about home. Look at this, Psalm 90, verse 1. Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. This is the cry of a homeless man. God, you are our home. It's not a house. It's not a town. It's not a place. It's not a group of people. It's not comfort. It's not nice furnishings. Home is where God is. Thought about this week with the fires in paradise, right? Paradise burned down. And yet you can lose a physical home, but if you've got God, you still got your ultimate home. You still have this dynamic. And so Moses is what he's saying, to be with God, that's to be home. Because ultimately there is no safe place on this earth. You can name it Eden, you can name it paradise all you want. There's only God. And so you have these fabulous statements that eventually feed into what Jesus would express about the kingdom of the God, the reality of that kingdom coming to be present with us. He's taking from these things. Psalms like, he who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, what? He is my refuge, my fortress, my God in whom I will trust. I'm telling you, you can rest in those words. You can live in that. Our longing for home is really an echo of our longing for God, our longing to be loved, our longing to be protected, our longing to be shaped and molded, our longing to be secure, our longing to be wanted. And I don't care how grown up we are, how mature we are, how good we look on the outside. Inside, we are children longing for home. Now, here's my problem, though. I want all that stuff, right? I do long for home, and yet I don't want God interfering in my freedom to do what I want. I don't want God telling me what to do. See, that messes up what I want to do. I don't want God's authority over my life, which is what makes me want to rebel against him. So I'm like the 17-year-old kid living at home. I like the cable, and I like the 3 square meals and all that, but I don't want the authority. I don't want to live under mom and dad's rules. And so I want to be home, except the part of me that doesn't want to be home. Anybody ever run away from home? Anybody? I remember one time my parents had done something really egregious to me. I don't remember what it was, but I'm sure it was just awful. And so I said, I'm leaving. And I packed up my little suitcase, and I told my mother to call my grandmother to come get me. And I went out on the curb and sat and waited. And 30 minutes, an hour later, my mom came out, and she said, your mama's not coming to get you. I said, why not? Well, for one reason, she's not coming because, she's raised her family. She's done with the family. She's not doing that again. And for another reason, she's not coming because you're not her boy. You're our son. You're not her son. And for another reason, she's not coming because You're 19 years old. You own a car. You're too old to run away from home, right? The reality is, though, none of us are ever really too old to run away from home. And that's the problem. I want God. I want to feel safe, but I don't want God. I want to be loved. I want to be protected, but I want to disobey. I want to do my own thing. And so therefore, the prophet Isaiah says this. He says, we all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way. Every single one of us, each of us, the Bible says we're all runaways. Probably the most famous story that Jesus told, the most unforgettable story, was a story about a runaway son. That there was a son who had this relationship with his father, but the home was broken for different reasons, and so the child ran away, and for a long time he didn't want to be home, and then he wakes up and realizes how miserable he's become, and then he wants to go home, but he's afraid home won't take him back, and so he says to himself, you know what, I'm going to try to go back to my father. I can't go back as a son anymore. I'll try to go back and earn my way back. I'll try to go back as a servant. I'll go on the good works plan. I'm going to go on the earn my way back plan, because home, home's the place where you go. They got to take you in. But what he doesn't know is that his dad has been looking for him every day. And this broken-hearted father of this broken home. And when he sees his son, it says a long way off, he just starts to run to him, and he throws his arms around him. And there's a celebration that my son has come home, because home is what you don't deserve. And the word for that is grace. And Jesus comes along, and Jesus is that man that Malachi predicted. He says, okay, everybody come home now. He says, you miserable runaway sons and daughters, you stiff-necked, stubborn rebels, everybody that's run away, it's time to come home. God is saying, as the Father, hey, I'm watching, I'm waiting, I'm ready to run to you, but come on home. Now, when Jesus talked about home, it is worth noting that home, in his day, home life in first century Palestine was very different than it is in our day. Right? Hope you know this. Hope you know the house that you live in here in town, the reality is, if you lived in first century Palestine, in fact, if you lived in most parts of our world today, you would not be living in that house by yourself, right? You would have all kinds of extended family members. You'd have an aunt and uncle up in the guest room, and grandma and grandpa, they'd be down in the main room, and you'd be somewhere else. But that's just how that worked, see. Many people lived back then in what was called an insula. Got a picture of an insula up here. So the way a house would work is kind of like this. You didn't have houses the way we do. What you would have would be kind of a common courtyard, this large open area. It's where you kept the animals. It's where you did the cooking. And just kind of this large open courtyard where everybody would hang out. And then you would have these dwelling places, these rooms where people actually lived, would be built around in this insula. And so that's how folks that would live. And so one house would have many generations of people living in it. And so when it says, in the Bible, the old ladies are supposed to train the young ladies, the reason you could do that is because they're all right there. They're living, on top of each other and next to each other, and you'd have this family. And if you were lucky enough to have a family that lived a long time, you just have all these generations. Marriages in this day were different than today. Marriages were generally arranged by the father. Kids didn't go out and just get engaged on their own. Their dad picked their mate. I can tell you this, the older my kids get, the more like wisdom that sounds to me. I don't know, it's just kind of a Bible thing. Girls would often get engaged. The average age is about 14 or 15. Maybe never mind the Bible thing, but that's that. Boys would be in their mid-20s, and families would come together and they would negotiate the bridal price. There would be a price, a dowry that would be paid. In fact, one of the Hebrew words for bride literally means she who has been bought with a price. Okay? Deanna had the TV on last night and Pretty Woman was on, right? That's she who has been bought with a price. We do something different with that today, right? But back then, this is what you did. If you wanted a bride, you had to pay a price. Some guys go, believe me, brother, I'm still paying. Yeah, I know. But what would happen is when the engagement would happen, when a son got engaged, the new couple didn't go out and start house hunting like they would today. Oh, let's go find an apartment. Deanne and I, when we got engaged, we were moving. I graduated from UT, got married 2 weeks later, moved to Springfield, Missouri 2 weeks later. We're going to go to graduate school. And we'd never been there before. But her sister lived there, her big sister. And so we let her pick out a place for us. I don't know why we did that, but we did. And for 2 years, we lived in this duplex that later we discovered was in the murder capital of Springfield. They didn't have a lot of murders, but right before we moved out, I saw in the newspaper that it had 12 murders that year, 8 of them within walking distance of our duplex, right? So, they didn't do that back then. You didn't go out and just pick your place. What would happen was the paternal family, the father's family of the groom, they would just add on another insula to the house. Okay, you're getting married, let's go back and build this place. And so when it was ready, the new couple would move into there. Oftentimes in Jesus' wedding stories, you might have noticed this, often in the wedding stories, he would talk about an announcement going out to people for the time of the wedding, right? The day of the wedding had come. And the reason for that is that dates got arranged for weddings quite differently than they do in our days. Nowadays, couples pick dates on the calendar that are way far out. We've got... is Joe in here? He's playing the bass. We've got Joe's thing on our refrigerator. They're getting married in May, and there it is. It's on the calendar. Sometimes couples will get engaged, and they'll come to me and say, hey, Pastor, we're getting married. Would you do our wedding? And I'll say, yeah, what's the date? And they'll tell me the date. I'll look at my calendar and go, well, if I'm still alive then, yeah, sure, I can, because it's kind of far out. You didn't do that back then. Back then, a couple would get betrothed, they would get engaged, but even they didn't know the actual date that the wedding was going to be. They knew they were committed, but they didn't know the specific date. They would get engaged, but then they would wait while what? While the building program got underway. And the groom would say to his bride, listen, I'm going to go back to my father's house, and we're going to get to work on making a place for you and I to live, and when it's ready, I'm going to come back for you. So you got to be ready for when I come back, and then we'll go to live together. And so the son and the family, then they would go back home, and the father would serve more or less as the general contractor on the project. And if the son was eager, as he probably was, he would be continually saying, Dad, can I go? Can I get her? Can I bring her back? Is it time? And the dad would say, no, not yet. It's not ready yet. It's not right. It's not done yet. You got to be patient. See? Until that day, when the father would finally say, all right, son, it's finished. Go get your bride. Bring her home. And all this time, of course, the bride would be waiting, right? That's a very vulnerable deal because they couldn't communicate like we do today. It's not like nowadays where there's text messaging and emailing going on. You couldn't FaceTime him back then, right? What if he's not being faithful? What if he's being faithless? What if she gave her heart to him and he never came back for her? That did happen sometimes. Still does. When it came, though, the day, finally, that she was waiting, the son would get his friends, and they would take a road trip over to this town, and they would enter the town, and there would be a parade. And to start the parade, to make the announcement, one of his friends would blow a trumpet. They had a ram's horn trumpet called a shofar. And they knew when the trumpet sounded, well, it was either two things. It was either bandits are coming to kill us, or somebody's coming to get married. I mean, they would have these, and so they'd be coming in. You'd hear the trumpet sound, and it was the bride's job to be ready when that trumpet sounded. Oh, here they are. Let's get everything together. They've been making plans. There's a lot of stuff to do. There were bridesmaids to recruit. There was a household to be arranged for and prepared. There was a wedding dress to be made. Because here's where, in that day, weddings were very similar to our day. In fact, even more so, that the wedding was a big deal on the social calendar. In fact, in ancient first century Palestine, outside of religious feasts and festivals, a wedding was probably the central social event in the local calendar. And so everybody wanted to see, what the bride would wear. Nobody really cared what the groom would wear. Very similar to today. Anybody read Modern Groom magazine? Me neither. Nobody. Everybody wants the bride look. Everybody says the bride looks radiant, right? I do a lot of weddings. I've never heard anybody say the groom looks radiant. He's just a prop. He's just there to do his thing. But I digress. Anyway, when the groom returns and the bride is ready, then there's a wedding. And then he would take her home. Now, one day, Jesus is talking to his friends. This is in John chapter 14. And he's telling them, guys, my time is up. I'm about to die. This is the night before he was going to be crucified. He's going to be taken away from them. And these guys are just devastated because a surprising thing had happened as they had begun to follow Jesus. This ragtag group of people had found a home. As they were wandering around, they had found a home. They had found a love they'd never experienced before. In Jesus, they'd found their identity. Now they knew who they were. He gave them a safety in the midst of this very dangerous adventure. He gave them this sense of belonging. And now he says that he's going to go. And they're thinking they're going to be more homeless than they had even been before. And so here's the picture Jesus uses to comfort them. Look at this, John 14:1. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust in me also. For in my Father's house are many, the King James Version says, many what? Many mansions, see? So we kind of get this idea that heaven is like this gated community, right? We're going to get in there, and we've got our whole big spread, you know. And the reality is my mom doesn't like the New Modern Translations very much because she thinks she's getting gypped on her mansion because they don't say mansion. Now, but this is one of those things that how language changes over time. Back in the King James day, the word mansion in English really just meant a modest dwelling. It didn't mean, you know, the giant palace on the hill. So a better translation in our day, here's what the NIV says. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. But I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me so that you also may be where I am. Now, they would have immediately understood the picture of what he's saying. This is groom talk. This is, I am going to my Father's house. I am going to my Father's insula. And there are many rooms there. He is preparing a place for them. And the way he is preparing it is he's preparing a way for them. See, the way is the cross. See, because we have this problem, remember, when it comes to going home, because our hearts aren't really prepared to be at home with the Father right now. Here's a true confession. Anybody ever lived in a home and you moved in and you knew there was some stuff you needed to fix up and you do, and then you just kind of ignored it? You ever do this? What happens eventually to those things that need to change? You ignore them. Right? You don't even see them anymore. In fact, is anybody, you've lived in a house for a long time, and then you get ready to sell it, you're like, oh, now I'll go spend the time and the effort to fix it so I can enjoy it for 2 weeks. Meanwhile, I've lived here for 10 years, I haven't done it, right? That's kind of the way the human heart works. We've got all this stuff inside that needs to get fixed, and we just get used to it. And so we need a rehabilitation. A home sometimes needs to be rehabilitated. Isn't that an interesting word? Makes it rehabitable. Isn't that the word? Why are some of the most popular shows on television, on the Home and Garden Channel? The most popular show on the Home and Garden Channel, it just went off a year ago, was that, what's the family from Waco, the Gaines? What was their show? Fix It? Fixer Upper, right? And they'd go in and fix up somebody's home and everybody's crying at the end. What's the one where they move the bus? Move that bus. They move off and these people living in this house and now it's beautiful, right? What is it about a home being rehabilitated that is not just, oh, that's a financial, but it touches your soul somehow, right? Gets into your heart. Because Jesus is saying this is the same thing that happens to us. We need to be rehabilitated. And so in that same chapter, Jesus says this, John 14:23, if anyone loves me, he will obey my teaching. My Father will love him, and he will come to him and make our home with you. Jesus says, I'll make a home, and it'll be in you. It'll be with you. I'll come and be home with you. But the reality is, I can't clean up my heart enough. Not for God. Listen, God gave me soft, delicate hands for the turning of pages, all right? Much to my father's chagrin, who literally gets and flips rental houses and does all this stuff. He's very skilled. I am not skilled. I got to have somebody come in. Some of you know this about me. And I was like, oh, it kills me. I'm not handy. Well, spiritually, I can't do the work either. I can't get my own life straightened out. There's just times I don't even know the dark things that I do. You know, I might think I'm doing something good, but my motives in that are completely twisted in that moment. And sometimes it takes somebody else around me to see and notice the things there. So I could never clean up my life enough. See, not for God, not by doing good deeds, not by giving enough money, not by showing up at church, not by working for the church, no. And so the idea is that Jesus came not to bring you the moral improvement plan, okay? And so, I'm going to earn my way back to home. That's the prodigal son still in the wilderness thinking like a slave. No, but Jesus comes and he does what I cannot do. He can make that heart right. He can come in and fix it all up and go pull away the bus and look at the change. See, and the Apostle Paul is writing the church at Corinth one time, and he says this, or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and that you are not your own? For you have been, what? Bought with a price. Bought with a price. Where have you heard that before? That's bride talk, see? You were bought with a price. That is why Jesus went to the cross. That's what he was doing on the cross. He was paying the bride price so that you can come home with the groom. And you can come home right now, today, by saying, Jesus, I understand that you went to the cross, that you died in my place so that my heart could become your home. And Jesus, I want your forgiveness. I want to have you come dwell in me, live in me, be with me. But then we look forward to the day because Jesus said, actually, I'm coming back. He told those disciples, don't worry, I'm going, but I'm going to come back and get you. Because what? He's a faithful groom. See, and that's what we've counted on. I can tell you, that's where I've placed all of my hope. I am banking on that with everything I've got. Paul one time says, if there's no resurrection from the dead, if Jesus isn't really raised, then we Christians, we're the biggest fools there are. I agree with that. That's true. If you can somehow convince me that Jesus is dead in a tomb and he didn't resurrect and he's not coming back for us and that we'll one day resurrect, I have wasted my life. But I don't believe that. I believe in faith that he is the faithful groom and that he made a promise to me and that one day he's going to come back. One day I'll hear a trumpet and the groom and his party are coming to get his bride. That is the story of the Bible. See, from the very beginning, God making a home for humanity, to the loss of that home, to God's promise to fix the home. I'm going to rehabilitate the thing. To Jesus paying the price. To the book of Revelation, the very end of the Bible. In the last part of Revelation, John says this. Remember John, who was there that night, who heard Jesus make the promise. He says, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. That bridal image represents our hearts. No more shame, no more guilt, no more junk, no more darkness. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. And on that day we'll be home. See, home with God, safe at home, the way we'd always longed to be. And I'm going to tell you, that's the home that you're longing for. And this Christmas, whether you get to go physically home or not, you can go home. You can come home and be with God. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask everybody to bow their heads. We're going to bring the lights down. I'm going to ask the band to come on up. And in this moment, this is just a time between you and God. And listen, if you're already at home, you know you're already spoken for. You've already been bought with that price. You know that. Well, this is a good time just to be thankful for that, to tell God how thankful you are, to tell Jesus how grateful you are. You know, Thanksgiving didn't end Thursday. We're not legally obligated to be thankful after Thursday, right? No, it's still, you can have hearts of gratitude, and you can say, Jesus, I'm so grateful as I remember and I think about that your heart is my home. Or maybe you're here and there's somebody in your life and you know they're not home. They're not where they need to be. And so maybe in this time, you want to pray for that person. God, that's my neighbor. That's the person I work next to. God, that's my son. That's my daughter. That's my brother. That's my sister. That's my mom. That's my dad. God, would you bring them home? Would you help me to be an agent of home? But maybe you're here and you don't know right now for sure that your home is that God is at home in your heart. And here's the thing, you can know that. You can know that. That same John wrote once in his gospel, he says, I write these things so that you may know that you have a right relationship with God the Father. And all you need to do is just tell him right now, God, I want to be home. I'm so tired of being anxious and being alone and afraid and full of guilt and full of regret. God, I admit I am the runaway. I have sinned. I don't want to be under your rules at times. I'm like that kind of rebellious teenager. But Father, I also understand now that I am bought with a price, that Jesus died on the cross for me. And I want to come home today. I want to receive your forgiveness in my life. I want to receive your love. I want to receive your life. So I want to ask you, God, to come and make your home in my heart. I want to invite that same Holy Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead to come into my life and to do a work of rehabilitation. Make my heart rehabitable for you, God. I want to ask you to help me with that. Be my friend. Be my God. Be my Savior. Be my forgiver from one day to the next. And then one day, God, when that trumpet sounds, I am going to go home with you. I'm going to be home with you forever. I'll be home for Christmas. I'll be home for all eternity. We thank you for this, Father. In Jesus' name. In Jesus' name we pray. Here's how I want to end. We're going to ask the band to lead us in a song that we sang earlier, and let this be a celebration for you. Let this be your prayer today. If you've prayed that prayer now or years ago, but let's just focus on what it means that God is our home as we sing this song together, and then we'll close out.